I'm very glad to welcome you at this first SCPA webinar. We decided in October 2019, when we formed the actual SCPA board, that it was, let's say, time to offer something new, something different to SCPA members. And we were really interested in building new opportunities to meet, for networking, to discuss hot topics for community psychologists. And of course, we were aware that, let's say, there are some places that really fit this, that are European conference or national conferences. However, our idea was that webinars would have been a good idea because we had the chance, and I'm talking about 5-6 months ago, that seems a very long time ago, but we were thinking about we had the chance to attend some webinars that were offered by SCRA, and we appreciated the format, and we thought that it would have been reasonable to introduce some virtual mobility both in terms of environmental and social sustainability. And also we thought maybe this is interesting in particular for young scholars, because usually they do not have permanent position, and they are interested in building cross-national networks because they want to increase their opportunities, also their occupational opportunities. And really, when we had this idea, we could not imagine that in a few months, webinars and virtual mobility would have been the rule for any situation due to the coronavirus pandemic. And we know the coronavirus erupted in our lives in a very unexpected way and contributed to a strong global crisis. But let's say, unfortunately, the coronavirus pandemic is not the only global crisis that we have to deal with. And already the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development represent an urgent call for action by all the countries in a global partnership. And that document recognizes that tackling climate change and working to preserve oceans and forests is part of a strategy, of any strategy that is aimed at reducing inequalities, improving well-being, and fostering community. Because we all know that global crises differently affect poor people, disabled people, minority, and dominated ethnic groups. And we all learned from James Gordon Kelly, who passed away last month, to learn to use the ecological analogy to understand the way in which settings and individuals are interrelated. And I want to make just an example that really introduces the topic of today's webinar. And it's the topic of environmental migrants or refugees. And imagine those people who moved from their house because climate change had affected their living condition in a very disrupting way. And usually those who are moving, we always think about other people that are moving. But where will we go when climate change will adversely affect our living condition, and these living conditions will be affected across the whole globe? I do not want to go into a dystopian or ecotopian narrative, even if I'm a fan of this kind of literature, so to say. However, this narrative claims for acts of resistance to fight injustice and inequalities. And I think that those narratives are not far from what community psychology is about. And you all know Donata Francescato, and you all know that she's not only an outstanding member of a CPA, and that she recently has received a special contribution to Community Psychology Award because of her exemplary contribution to the field of community psychology. She has always been, and she's also now, an activist working to empower those who are more vulnerable, fighting injustice and inequalities. And I think that is probably the reason why she's now engaged in working toward the protection of the environment, because protecting the environment is critical in order to increase environmental justice. And I will leave in a minute the floor to Donata. But before that, I want to thank Maria Fernanda Jesus, who is managing the technical part of this meeting. I want to thank Martina Barankova, who took care in particular of the communication strategy and the registration part. And I want to thank also Francesca Esposito. They all together with Fortuna Procentese, Anna Bogzanic and Maria Varga Bonis are part of the board of SCPA. Francesca will take care of the questions and answer session, and you will be able, as I said, to use the chat function to write down your questions to Donata. You can write down your questions or your comments while Donata is speaking, but those comments and questions will be read afterwards during the specific session. And those questions and comments will be read by Francesca to Donata. As I said, it would have been probably nice to have a live debate, but we are happily too many to manage this kind of situation. The webinar will be registered and will be made available soon on the CPA website and also on the social networks. I think that you now are all very familiar with the Zoom technicalities, but the chat function is at the bottom of your screen. And yeah, I think that, let's say, the most essential rules have been given. I think that we all are now eager to listen to Donata. So I give the floor to Donata, and I thank you for your attendance.
Okay, then I want to say welcome really from the heart to anybody who is here. And I hope that by the end of today, I mean, by the end of this webinar, all of you will be able to be activists for getting at least some other people that you know are not interested in the environment to be interested in it. To find these new ideas how to, you all must have friends who don't want to be involved. And so I've tried in these slides to find different techniques to start the involvement with people. And the techniques are emotional. See, I think human beings, in my experience, only do things when they have positive emotion toward change. And so COVID-19, with all the problems it has been giving us, gave us a big gift, because it showed for the people who don't believe in climate change or environmental problem, that instead there is a strict relation between high air pollution and increased mortality in COVID-19. Two recent research, one done in April 2020 by Bain, who studied 10,000 Italians who died of coronavirus, found that all four had pre-existing disease tied to local air pollution. In fact, the region where they had most death were Lombardia, Veneto, and Emilia-Romagna, who have high level of particulate. The diseases who existed and contributed to the fatal death are ischemic heart disease, cerebrovascular disease, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, lower respiratory infection, and lung cancer. This research done in Italy, very small, has been confirmed much better in the United States through a Harvard nationwide study that found that an increase of only 1 microgram of particulate matter per cubic meter is associated with 15% increase in mortality. So the ones of you who have friends who only understand by the emotion of fear, you can show that they are right to be fearful, because indoor pollution caused about 3 million deaths in 2015. 4 million outdoor pollution. So totally 7 million deaths, more than all the automobile accident, which don't reach 1.5 million. Air pollution, that is one of the big problems, is caused by people inhaling or ingesting these particulates, which are so fine they penetrate the lungs and bloodstream, and it can be emitted directly from fuel combustion or forming directly from atmospheric reaction involving sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide. So the people who fear for their health can be maybe convinced through showing these two slides about the study. But one factor that used to be very popular 20 years ago, that we are too many on the earth, has been kind of neglected, but here I will show that it was not completely wrong, because in 1950, the population size was 2.5 billion. Now we are around 8 billion. The data you should see here is 2018. And we project 1 billion humans by the 2100. What happens? That all the people who like systemic thinking here will be very interested, because there are relations between all these variables I'm going to talk about. First, we are grown a lot. Second, we have grown the gross national domestic product. Look at this, look, you saw the population went exploding, and here from the 50, again, we see an explosion. And look, what's next? Well, instead of peaking, the population growth peaked down, but the thing is very strong, because the GDP went even faster. So in general, we have this kind of, that the consumption of energy went up a lot. And what's wrong is that we have 90% is world energy in fossils and very little in the new renewable. And we have to change it, because today 90% of energy consumed comes from coal, oil, and natural gas. And burning fossil fuel produces energy, yes, but carbon dioxide and particulate matter. The more, and here is interaction, the more people we are, the more we need energy for heating and cooling of our homes, for producing and delivering all the goods and services we consume, for personal travel by cars, public transport, trains, and airplanes. And therefore, more production of electricity is required. Now, the more, there is another variable very important, that praticamente the more the temperature raises, the more CO2 there is in the air, the more the two together grow, as you can see. And particularly the temperature in the last years has grown a lot, as you can see, and is projected to grow more, which is very dangerous. So climate change makes more urgent the change from fossil fuels to renewable. Our planet is becoming warmer. It's already 1 degree hotter than in 1860. We have more frequent storm, tropical cyclone, hurricane, flooding. Hotter summer, heat waves, wet bulb temperature, which means when there is humidity, there is lethal death already at 35 degrees or more. There is a desertification, stalling hot or cold weather, harm crops, more severe forest fires, especially in Australia, California, Russia, and Canada. Sea rise, because it absorbs more heat from the meltwater from glacier and ice sheet on Antarctica and Greenland, and huge decrease in biodiversity. Now, another thing that's been interesting to see is that there is the global warming increasing also the possibility of virus to represent themselves. Because variation in temperature, humidity, soil condition, and deforestation, destroying the natural habitat, are favoring the spillover. 60% of emerging infectious diseases are transmitted to humans by wild animals. So the friends, you know, that are inspired by fear for their health should look at this data. You can use this data to reach their hearts, because it shows that it's not only the environment that suffers, but we will suffer as humans. I know that the environmentalists among you don't care so much and don't like the us human care only about human, but I am from psychology, and I know my fellow psychologists and my fellow humans in general care more about things that concern themselves than just animals or biodiversity. It's not true, but it's not a good thing, but it's a way to understand that to reach other people, we have to first understand our mind, their mind function. For instance, illegal traffic of animals and plants is the big business. It's the third largest after weapons and drug traffic, and is often managed by same criminal organization. These people generate $7 to $23 billion every year, and the main country of origin are China, Thailand, and Indonesia. Do you know why they want so much this? Because most males who get this thing think that from these animals they get more sexual potency. So if you have to kind of show that there is no relation between eating certain animals and being sexually potent. Another thing that is increasing is that global warming is damaging the permafrost. And again, here is the emotion of fear that we are talking about. We have to increase the fear of people who fear bacteria and viruses. We are going to increase it because now, damaging the permafrost in the polar ice field and glacier, we are going to wake up virus and bacteria who have been sleeping there peacefully for thousands of years. This could have a consequence for humans and all the other living creatures, showing us that we are all together. Humans, and we are all living creatures of the planet, a very delicate, beautiful planet called Earth. Permafrost thawing also leads to increased greenhouse gas emission. And again, this is not good for our lungs, besides everything else. The gas that bubbles from the oxygen-deprived mud under ponds and lakes is not only carbon dioxide, but also methane, which is 25 times as potent as greenhouse gas. Now I touch instead a second big problem, which is not dominated by the dynamic of fear, the emotion of fear, which is, I've taken fear, I say to the people who came in late, I'm discussing what are the main emotions behind this topic that we can use to convince some people to change their minds on these topics. Well, this one is a topic of justice. This is more easy, for instance, for community psychology, that's a typical topic. We've been fighting injustice all over the world, especially in Europe onwards. But because it has to do with fairness. So people who have a strong positive emotion toward fairness can be convinced by looking at this inequality distributed environmental injustice. I look now first for Europe. After all, we are the European Community Psychology Association. Okay, what's going to happen in Europe? Human mortality is going to increase from heat and cold waves, both of them. More from cold. We are now 2,700 deaths. Well, in a few years again, we'll have, if we increase 1/5, we'll have 30,000. If we increase 2 centigrade, we'll have 50,000 deaths. The rise for extreme east, get where we'll be, where most of the guests from Europe come from this place today, Spain, Italy, Portugal. We will be the country that will suffer most. So again here, not only the justice, but the fear of death can also be a motivation thing. The other thing is water resources. It's going to be very interesting. When I didn't know much about this, but the north is going to be very wet, and we are going to be very dry in the south. And more water will be available in the north, and we have reduced water in the south. And Now we are 3 million already with water scarcity occasionally in the summer. This number could rise fourfold. Okay, what's interesting is the divide. The climate change shows a north-south divide in Europe. And what does it mean to be more impacted by climate change in the south? That you decrease the wheat and maize yields, there could be more fires, the alpine tundra will disappear in the Pyrenees and the Alps. And this makes me particularly sad because I love mountains. And most of you that like mountains would be sad too. We'll have increase in drought losses in Mediterranean European Union countries. We'll also have welfare, larger problem than in the northern region. And in the north, they'll have more river flooding and coastal inundation. This graph shows exactly this. In region 1, as you see, northern England, France in part, northern part, Germany, there will be more rain. In the second, the southern, there will be more droughts. And in the third region, which is Central Europe, there will be a lot of drought. Okay, the burden of climate change now is unfairly in the southern region. And the environmental justice worldwide is even worse. Now, United States and China and Europe produce most emission, but within each country, it's low-income people and people of color that bear the highest environmental harm from waste sites, incinerator, refineries, and transportation infrastructure. Worldwide, countries with people of color and low-income population will suffer more from hurricane, rising sea level, and climate change extreme weather. In Africa, Asia, and Latin America, these highly polluted zones and coastal area are called sacrifice zone, which is kind of bizarre way to call them. Like we sacrifice the zone and the people in it for the benefit of the other. This is environmental injustice at its worst. We consciously sacrifice some zone of the earth to make sure that the rest of it is better. And the zone are all in Europe is very guilty, in the United States too, and China too. In Africa and Asia and Latin America are this zone called sacrifice zone. Environmental justice organizations, thank goodness, are very present to fight, and they fight against what they call racism and discrimination to reach equitable distribution of environmental risks and benefits. And the word fair should here appeal to your friends who want to be fair, who are generally good people who don't even know this thing, that we are building sacrifice zone where the people suffer and are much more at risk than we are. But the important thing is that AGO want to participate in environmental decision making. At the moment, these sacrifice zone inhabitants haven't chosen to be the martyr for us. We impose it on them. The other important thing is written recognition of community ways of life. This is important for psychology. We know and we use local knowledge, and we know that cultural differences are a very good, strong point, because only thinking differently, we learn something more. If we stay always with friends who have the same ideas of us, and most of us tend to do that, and identity politics has made this a real danger, because people are now, in America, United States shows a problem. People are all fighting for their individual group identity, and they forget that we are human beings and we are all living in the same small planet, which is now in danger. I will tell you a little secret. I was, for years, the sister of Grazia Francescato, who has been telling me for 30 years some of these things. And I'm guilty because I thought, well, Grazia exaggerates. And I thought, well, my husband Bill, which is a very good environmental energy saver, he'll find, smart as he is and the other, they'll find solution. Well, they're now finding solution. I changed, and I am now, for 2 years now, an activist, as I will explain soon in Friday for the Future, because I realized it wasn't true. And I think that's why I insisted with community psychology to become more engaged in environmental justice, because we're interested in all the other justice. But this one is prioritary, not because it's best, but because if we don't have a good inhabited, all of us will suffer. And in fact, I invite you to all go to the Environmental Justice Atlas. It's an association that, you know, practically counts all the conflicts in the world. Now, and they found, as was expected, the most conflicts involve local indigenous population, mostly, against international corporations. I want to repeat it. Most of the conflicts involve locals who are often indigenous minorities who have no power, like in Brazil now, against international corporations. How is it environmental justice battle about land grabbing for producing palm oil, for instance, which causes deforestation, water pollution, infertile soil and fires, and it's done again in Latin America and Indonesia, the famous sacrifice zone. But mega mining is also, of bauxite and gold, is also something that damages the environment, and it's done primarily in Latin America and Western Africa. In environmental justice, I found that trash economy, this is very good, to prevent shipping, we generally ship our hazardous waste from high consumption, that means from Europe, from United States, to countries in the global south. Again, we treat them as our garbage disposal. One minor one, but not so minor for the people who live there and live for fish, is fighting for fish. All the fishermen who had small-scale fishing, and therefore they lived for century and century in their river and in their sea places. The industrialization of fishing, which is done primarily by Japan, but everybody else too in the developed world, is destroying this community of fishermen in India, Chile, and Turkey. Now I want to change now that if you can't convince them with the unfairness thing, you can try to convince your friends or your spouse or your sister, like my sister tried to convince me, that with another thing. There are some people that spontaneously are more attracted to activism when they think they can produce something. And mitigation, so the variable they go on is hope. The big sustaining emotion for these people is not, like we saw for the others, fear, but hope. And so they are interested. If you tell them, we can do something about it, we are doing it, it's more likely that they listen to you, okay? It's called mitigation and adaptation. Now, COVID gave us another gift. It showed to everybody that if you stop or 17% reduction of greenhouse, the river became full of fish again. In Venice, there were again the fish, and the sky was blue in Milano. But this reduction is called temporary. Why? Because we may have more public support we have now more public support to replace coal with cheaper renewables. And in China, United States and Australia, they're trying. But to replace oil may be more difficult. Some people had their hope in smart working. But when we stop smart working, sometimes car use and airplane may still increase because some people don't want to take public transport and they use more car. We have to see. We still are not in that phase. Climate mitigation campaigns have one characteristic in common. They ask us to be patient and persistent for decades. These grind mitigation campaigns are dependent by 70% on decision by government on how to spend on energy. Now, one big mitigation agreement was reached in 2015, and I think everybody was happy, or at least most people thought that was a good sign. But it required to develop plans for severe emission reduction. And public opinion today, after COVID, is again very favorable to fighting climate change. As you see, The Economist on May 23rd. But what is the problem again? We see that as you remember, the Paris Agreement was immediately flanked by His Majesty Donald Trump. He alone in the United States had the power to make United States go back in their leadership position on green, and was imitated by most people, most kind of tough man leader in other countries. So finally, we now have as a mitigation program the best one, the European Green Deal, but it's still a Green Deal on paper. A woman, now head of the European Union, has proposed a set of policy initiatives that want to make Europe climate neutral by 2050. So again, 30 years. The plan includes potential carbon tariffs for countries that don't curtail their greenhouse emission. It includes a circular economy action plan, which is reduce, reuse, repair, and recycle. A review and possible revision of the all relevant climate-related policy instrument. Very interesting, a farm to fork strategy for agriculture, shifting from compliance to performance. They will reward farmers for managing and storing carbon in the soil and for improving nutrient management and reducing emission. Now, this on paper is very good, but it still has to be approved by the European Parliament. And the problem is that it may be difficult to reach and be able to have compliance, because see the problem. If we go on like this, like we are now, we are going to have about 3 degrees in 2030. And we need to cut at least 2 or 1/2 down. So even if we don't do anything, you see how difficult it is that the mitigation just for Europe, because we're going to have just the mitigation in Europe. And if we don't have it in the other countries, so again, the lesson here is we all have to be united. We have to fight for common planetary. And this is what here come the young people. They say, Green Deal is not fast enough. You are robbing us of our future. The Friday for Future activists, you remember old Greta Thunberg. There was only 15 when she sat outside alone in the parliament, in front of the parliament. And she has been able to get together millions of young people all over the world. And also she was smart enough to create not only Friday for the Future, but Parents for the Future, where Bill and I are activists since last year when it was started. She says, her fans say, we only have 10 years to make drastic changing. The word is drastic, and avoid irreversible climate change damages. Fridays want the government to declare a state of emergency and quickly takes extraordinary measures. That's the point. We can't just do mitigation. We have to arrive at zero emission. We have to increase renewable energy efficient, and waste recycle. The aim is to change, and this is important, the present money center, economic center, which counts only how much money you have, and all of us are pushed to become richer and consume more, to a circular economy that focuses on promoting the well-being of the planet and all its inhabitants. And I want to, my heart, tell you how much I feel, and I think the people here can feel the same. Some people may feel the same way. I feel that our planet is so small in the universe. That's all we have, a very little planet. And it's no use to pursue individual success, money, or happiness when we are all together. And when people are not well in other parts of the world, pretty soon their problem come here. And so here, the way to go, the way that Greta convinced me was saying, you are robbing our future. I'm a grandmother. And I think some older people may be reached if you point out that their beloved grandchildren are not going to have a good life. And the fault is because we are not doing enough. So now I come to my colleagues, my beloved colleague. Psychology has been always in the business of healing, of getting people well, or adjusting the disgraces that people have had. And now, what we have now is a very important mission. We have to promote individual and collective well-being because we have an international emergency in most countries that were hit by coronavirus. Many people had to face losing dear ones without being near their dying, without celebrating funerals, which human beings for centuries and millennium have invented a ceremony to share the pain. They had to die with hugs and embraces, and now have unmet emotional needs. Many hours have experienced for months high doses of negative emotion, fear, anxiety, rage, resentment. And they've been worried about the future, especially the future of their children. They're grown. Boys and girls are now 26, 27, and waiting from a little job to another little job, never knowing what to do. Being locked down and distance working and learning has improved already satisfactory couple and family relation, but has worsened already conflictual relation between partners and parents and children. So what do we have to do, ecologists? We have a task very important, helping diffuse the negative emotion and preventing violence. Experiencing lasting negative feeling makes us more liable to depression, psychosomatic disorder, and violence. We need to increase the opportunities of accessing psychological support also online. We need to prevent domestic violence on women and children, increasing territorial psychological service and women's centers, which have been closed in lots of places. In Italy, many psychologists have worked as volunteers, and I admire them during the crisis. We have to increase paid jobs for community and psychology in general. Especially, we need to promote empowerment projects for those groups like old people in nursing home or people of colors who had higher mortality rates. Persistent racism, ageism, and classism have to be fought at the political, economic, and social media level to diminish provoking collective violence on the street, which increase resentment, fear, and hate. What can we do as individuals, families, and neighbors? Well, this is important. This is the motion that asks this question is to empower people. Greta says, nobody is too small or too old or too young not to do something. This empowers a person to think that she's not completely alone or impotent. So we can consume less energy by buying efficient certified household appliances. We can practice the circular economy in the home. We can use more ecological transport, walk, cycle, car sharing. We can recycle. These are interesting, and this suggestion comes from my husband because he's been doing these things. Make energetic diagnosis of our home and all the buildings we use in our neighborhood, school, office, sports center, churches, hospital, nursing home, and promote energy requalification and upkeep. One good thing Italy has done, and I hope all the other European nations, other nations can follow, is practically allow us to do this requalification almost free because there is big deduction and when we pay the taxes. And then there is one thing that I thought about, it's kind of vote for party and politicians who fight climate change and denounce those who negate. Trump, Bolsonaro, and Johnson, and most authoritarian leaders in far-right movement all over the world are also, alpha male that deny, because they're still in the old vision to see nature is something to be conquered, to dominate. The word that Trump likes most is, he wants even the policeman to dominate the protester. Now, this thing is a nice picture that shows that our houses, churches, buildings where we work can be very green or very red. So we need to do what I just said, requalification. Now, what could we do instead as professional and activists? we can do what we're doing today, spread environmental problem awareness in our national and international psychological association. We can partner with environmental activist associations like Greenpeace, World Wide Fund, Friday for the Future, and support their battles. But especially we can promote active citizenship education projects that deal both with environmental and health issues and promote, this is important, emotional awareness. The feeling of impotence and fear lead to climate denial and indifference. Feeling of impotence and fear of future lead to climate denial or indifference. We can spread the good things we witnessed during the pandemic, neighborhood mutual aid, intergenerational supportive relation, and all the forms of solidarity described in various studies like Arcidiacono, Wolf, and Stark are now publishing. One project that I want to suggest, because we already started doing it, and it seems to have, it can be applied everywhere, is before the pandemic, Bill and I, two age grandparents, tried to do a 2-hour pilot intervention requested by a community psychology who was beginning to appear tutoring project in high school. Why did they ask for 2 hours? We have been doing for years community psychology with social affective education, environmental program courses, but they lasted a whole year and once a week. And we thought, well, now the school can only offer 2 hours. What can you do in 2 hours? So we invented these modules, which follow the module of the school year, but they can be done in 2 hours. And so can be done in churches, can be done in whole homes, houses, can be done wherever there is a group interested in talking and doing something together. The intervention begins with discussing, in the case of me and Bill, we were in the Friday for a Future movement. To do this intervention, psychology must partner with an environmental expert. So it's good because we get to work together. First, the people are there. It's very important with young people, old people, to say why you're doing this. They like the story. Then we present data like I just presented to you. Not too many, because if a deluge of data cannot be grasped immediately. But we talk especially between the data that involve both the environment and the health. And then we know that they will become much more worse. Important part, which is different from other courses, then we sit in the circle time, sharing what emotion are raised by the data. You can think for yourself one moment, what emotion do you have when I talked about this different thing? Was something disturbed you most? Was something that gave you hope? What are the emotions? Because again, we have learned from social affective education in years. My book was written in 1986 when I first did the first. Sharing emotion raised by data presentation reinforces the sense of we, of community. And then the people, the student in this case, explore what they can do as individual, as a class, and how they can join or not join environmental movement. I'm about to finish. And this is the most important level for me. As important as the other one, but this one is crucial because of the situation of crisis we have now. How can we, as community psychology activists, do something at the social political level? First, support parties and politicians who fight climate change, and also weaken democratic institutions. That's an important point, to get some support from people who don't really give much about environment, but they're very interested in democratic institutions. These people are the people who fought against, totalitarian governments when they were young, very young, and now they're very old. And they are very interested in keeping our democracy in Europe, which are also threatened. So we can support the European Green Deal and other similar plans in Canada and New Zealand. We can follow local green initiative, become activists or sustain environmental association. Especially we can fight environmental injustice, joining protests, sustaining legal national and international campaigns against racism and discrimination. My particular approach is to partner with ecofeminists. I'm a woman. a woman of a certain age. And I had to fight with lots of women since I was very young, both in America and in Italy, because as the eco-feminists say, there is a tie between the subordination of women in society, domestic violence, the abuse of natural resources, environmental degradation, and the increase of local wars and conflicts. Bear with me. These negative developments have their roots, according to the ecofeminists, in the uncritical adoption of almost all countries of a libertarian free market ideology, a growth model based on gross national product and on accumulation of weapons. And this is what I noticed. Many nations are governed by alpha males who pursue wealth and power through extreme economic competition, the use of violence to solve conflicts, and the ruthless exploitation of environmental resources. We need more female political leaders. COVID gave us another lesson, showed us that the best country dealing with the COVID were all run by women: New Zealand, Germany, and the Scandinavian countries, and also Korea. Especially, and that's the last one, we need to support and work with anti-racism groups. The disregard for Black lives and the life of indigenous people and people of color is also at the root of the climate crisis. Fueling century of colonization, extraction of resources, have created inequitable climate impacts, as we saw. Any meaningful solution to the climate crisis must therefore center on racial equality and justice. In other words, we must oppose racism every day if we want action on climate to succeed. This is an organization that is fighting for climate change. In Europe, we are guilty too. It's not just an American problem. In Europe, the disregard for people of color killed thousands who make risky immigration journey across the Mediterranean, since European governments do not provide enough safe corridors. They have never came to an agreement how many people, how can they come, etc. The problem is put aside. As Community Psychology Association, we can support groups like Black Lives Matter, Code Rood, which is a Dutch climate justice collective, the European Network Against Racism, Wretched of the Earth in United Nations, Kingdom, and others. Thank you very much for your attention. Here, if you want the slides, they will be made available. And here are all the places where I took the stuff. Thank you very much. So stop the sharing, no? Stop the sharing.
Thanks, Donata.
I'm almost without voice because I had climate change tonight here in Tuscany.
Thanks, Donata, in the name of everybody.
Thank you, Caterina.
So, can you hear me?
I can see you, yes.
Yeah, okay. So thank you. I want to thank Donata on behalf of the ECPA for, her great and energizing talk, and not only for the amazing scientific quality of her work that she showed today, as she showed during all these years, but also for how her presentation made, I think, all of us critically think about these issues, urge us to act on these issues and collectively work towards environmental justice. So I really want to thank you, and I think your presentation really embodies the spirit of community psychology, and when we speak about the importance of transformative change and social justice and a more just world in general. So thank you. And now I think a lot of people have a lot of questions for you, so I'll try to collect the questions and moderate. Okay, so we have the first one. I'm gonna read to you, Donata, and then I'll let you answer, okay?
Okay.
So, sorry to everyone if I misspell the names, because Can you hear me?
I can.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. So there's a question from Alejandro. Good afternoon, excellent talk. Her presentation was very interesting. I would like to know, what do you think about the peak of oil? The Green Deal depends on this. I'm pessimistic about climate change policies. The reduction in CO2 emissions is likely to be unintended, as has been the case with COVID-19. So thank you, Alejandro, and I'll leave you, Donata, to answer the question.
Well, my reason tends to agree with you, my heart no. See, it's true that most human beings learn through being made fearful of something worse happen. But I think there is enough of us, and I hope I include you, that see the problem, but don't give up. And look, the women and all the people who did, women liberation has done a lot. I mean, I am the proof, but all the people sitting here, the women, are the proof that we can change. And so we can change the climate too. Naturally, you're right, because oil is, you know, is owned privately by big corporations. But as my husband keeps telling me, some of them are not in favor of keeping oil. They are also investigating other possibilities. So we can, you know, push those corporate leaders who are going in the opposite direction. And there are some.
Thank you, Donata, for your reply. And we have another question from Gisela. Which action plan would you suggest to a school for citizenship education focusing on the issues you described?
Well, thank you for your question. I presented very briefly what is not an action plan, but is simply an awareness promoting meeting, because we found out that teachers don't have so much time to give us. No? So Friday for the students as school groups. And so what Bill and I invented this very short one, but very meaningful. In 2 hours, you can, if you take all 4 parts, which is personal witness, which people, you know, of all the ages respect, saying, look, I'm here with my free time because I want to do something that may be useful for you. They have to feel that you believe it. That's very important, testimonials who are. That's why I say it's important to go there. One, environmental. My husband a minute ago could have given a much better answer to Alexandro. I'm not so competent in the environmental part, okay? But I'm competent in the part of how do you reach people's souls? How do you move them enough to action? And so the student, in just 2 hours, if you show them to people, then more stuff like, you can just take the program here, Giselle, I know you do a lot in schools, you can just give freely, you know, the slides I made here, the ones are enough for a classroom or for old age group or a church group. So you have to show some data, because some people are convinced only by data, okay? Then you pass on asking their emotion. And it's interesting because 15, 20 people, 30 people share emotion. And you see what are in their group, how they go from despair and anger. No, for instance, the Friday for people are always trying to find a guilty party because they are so full of rage and despair that they are very happy to insult the older generation, which is true. It's us that didn't do anything, but it's a satisfaction to be able to say, you didn't do anything. And from that, at a certain point, there is somebody in the group always that says, but we can do something. And so, for instance, in our group, at the end, almost all of them said, we want you to they asked this question, what can we do in our school? Because they kind of were activated. They went from feeling completely disempowered and angry, they went to being hopeful and thinking, well, we can do. And that's what we have to do with the young generation. We are just now freezing them in a kind of place where they cannot work, they cannot study, the future is on hold. They call it like that, future on hold. But with this meeting, 2 hours, and 2 hours also you tell them they can do the diagnosis of the school. Here, Bill can tell you later, I mean, there is lots of money the European Union has put for this, for getting the buildings requalified. And in Italy, we have a tremendous, I bet all over Europe, we don't have schools and public building on our street, which are all quality, energy efficient. And I think a tremendous amount of energy goes in the building industry and in our buildings. So I think that's one of the we can do short awareness thing. And then if they, there are, several long programs if they want to do an environmental course. Francesca, I'm finished. Okay. It's Caterina, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, we have another question from Brad. And he says, Jim Kelly and others seem to have thought that ecology, as in nature, was a good metaphor for our work in human communities. But you, Donata, don't see human ecology and nature throughout the globe as a metaphor. You see humans and nature as inseparable, as one and the same system. Is that correct? If so, how do we, community psychologists, need to change our thinking and work to be more global, universal, and interspecies? What guidance would you give our field here?
Thank you for the question. It's very difficult, but it's one I've been trying to answer for the last 2 years. When I realized my mistake, I think the first thing is humility. We have to realize that being community psychology and humans, we have been guilty of privileging humans. Animals, nature, was a setting of our action. We looked like, the world was a theater stage in which we play our parts. And we're so busy playing our parts that we didn't look at all the ants, the flowers, the butterfly, the animals that were extincted. 50% of all the species are now extinct, and another 25 are in danger of extinction. Pretty soon it will only be us. And I think lots of people, including psychologists, behave like the world is for humans. I think we have to start, you're right. When we read Bateson or Kelly, we actually don't include the real planet. That's why I said we need to develop in psychology planetary sense of community, which means we have to convince people that it's a beautiful, frail, delicate planet. We are ruining the planet that is our setting and the setting of thousands, milliards of other sentient beings. Only if we have a planetary sense of community, that we're all in this beautiful, can we solve the problem? And I also think, what I said before is I want more female leadership. I studied for many years what are the values of politicians and the difference between male and female. One constant value difference is that the women are more transcendent. They are more interested in the welfare system, in education, in environmental issues. The men who prefer to give money for economics, as we see now, weapons, and fighting as a way to show who is most dominant. We have one thing I suggest is to make one thesis on the words of Trump. Even this week, he used the word dominate, no? And he made fun of the government, democratic government, who didn't want to gas the people were protesting the death of the poor black man. And he said, don't be sissies, be male, be men. And it's interesting, we have to fight against this old-fashioned negative view of male. I've discussed this with my husband Bill, who is American, a long time, and we came up with the fact that we have to find again the protector side of male. there is a beautiful side of males, which is a protector role, and not the dominator or the warrior role. But what is going on now, and even the word we use, look, they're fighting the coronavirus. What are they fighting the coronavirus about? He doesn't even know he's being fought against. I mean, we use a war-like language, or we use an ecological language. Ecology is seen simply as a setting. And I think if we go in this direction, so we have, another thing is, in social psychology, we have given too much credit to the part that's called that the way describe bring them into being. No, it doesn't bring them into being. We don't construct all the reality. Part of the reality is beyond us. We are not the main dominant force. We try to be, but it's bad. We are not. We are within, not above. That I would say.
Thank you, Donata. I think it was really an inspiring answer. So we have another question from Maria Fernandez. So do we think it is possible to achieve climate justice within this capitalistic system? And how to move from the focus on individual change behavior to the community and policy levels? I don't.
So there are two questions.
Yeah, are two questions. Do you want me to read both, or you prefer to first ask?
One is about capitalism. The other one is about policies.
Is about how to move from the focus on individual change behavior to the community and policy levels. I don't think individual change is enough to solve climate change, but most of the policies focus on that level. So basically, yeah, one is about climate justice within the capitalistic system, if it's possible to achieve that. And the other one is about this individual level focus on most policies and interventions, and how effective this might be or not, and how we can move from this to another level, more community level and policy level of action.
Congratulations, I get one harder question after another. Pretty soon I will give up. Okay, on capitalism. I've discussed this for 40 years. European capitalism, can we say something good about Europe? It's different from financial founded capitalism in America. And also, we don't believe in as much in Europe, because we have all this old ancient stuff around us, that we are self-made. We are more in touch with history. What does history show? That revolution is not a good thing. Okay, we can't just kill all the capitalist stuff, because generally every time we try that, other took their place. Just all males all the time, but somebody takes a place. So no use being bloody. As a woman, I prefer the dialogue. Yes, I would dialogue even with capitalism, because as I said, they're beginning to show that through the Europe as a Green Deal, so that you could say that's a woman who did it, but she, if it's voted by the parliament, the majority are men. So I think that Europe, I'm very proud to be European, because we have the culture and all the wars and the fights in our memory. I mean, just 60 years ago, we were fighting. Now, France and Germany talk all the time, and they were fighting a deadly war just until 45. So we know in Europe, more than in America, that you can change. I think they're scared in America because they are the longest republic, and they don't know now if their system can survive and how much they can go, because, you know, if we have a problem of racism, they have an even bigger problem of racism. We are creating one with all the way we treat migrants, and we'll have it in 10 to 15 years here, but we don't have it right now like they do. So I think if Europeans can have more influence, we can reform capitalism, because it's a good system to build, but doesn't distribute. And the second question is tied to it. I think in a way, the redistribution is possible. For instance, In America, they were paying, the big people made money, they were paid 80% of their taxes during the Eisenhower year. So it's not that they didn't, what happened is that they cut all the taxes for the rich in the last 30 years, and the Republican did that. So again, to go to the level, we have to require changes, identifying precise goals, like please restore the taxes at the 40%, 50% level for the people earning more than $1 million a year. And there are few, we have quite a few, because there are lots of millionaires and lots of billionaires in America, all over the world. The problem, so it's not capitalism, because in China, we have a state capitalism, and they behave toward the environment the same way. So there is a stakeholder capitalism. That means the capitalism that takes into account, and this we should promote, the capitalists, they put the capital, but the workers work, and the customer, and the community where the firm is located. What has happened now with international community corporation, they've been allowed to go to the country where they pay fewer taxes. Well, if we start looking as a planet, they won't be able to do that anymore. And so that's one way to go, just identifying even small steps, because I don't think the revolution up to now in history, European history, American history, all the history of the world, we just change one group of leaders that, you know, ransack the country for another group of leaders. Justice and freedom are kind of hard to put together. And that's why it's important that we think about deeply. You young people that can see the faces now, that's your job especially. Because I won't see this good development, but I believe in it. And you remember my words when you achieve it. But it's not something you achieve once and forever. You have to have a vigilant, and that's very important, doing the citizenship thing that most of us are doing. Because the children have to learn from elementary school that they are citizens.
Thank you, Donata. And I think we're gonna take the last few questions, and then, I mean, we will probably finish also because you might be very tired. So there is a question from Cinzia, who asked, should we go for environmental decolonization? And maybe I can also include my own question, which somehow is connected, which is about the link. Many times you mentioned migration and migration justice in your talk, which I think it's really important. And so I would like you to somehow expand on the interconnection between a struggle for migration justice and for environmental justice, because I think, as you said, they are very interconnected.
So you beat, this question is even harder, hardest of the three. And I'll say why it's hard. Identity politics is a necessity for the human being. Human beings try to see, who is my group? You know, they do it in schools. They put together the girls here, the boys here. By third grade, they make little groups. So this habit we have to in-groups and out-group is something that's very profound need. And we have to be careful when we say decolonizing or taking away identity. But the identity politics can go too far and prevent, we talk so much about difference that we don't see what we have in common. First thing, that we all die. We have very important things in common. And the focus should be on where we are similar. But why in Europe is so delicate, the question, and everywhere is delicate? Because we have about 1/3 of Europeans who feel threatened because they are already not doing so well. I mean, it's not only the people of color and let's say the migrants that are not well to do. In Italy, and in all countries, the people that are not well range from 10% to 30%. In this moment, for instance, in Italy, it's already 20%, it's going to grow. So there is a real contrast of interest between our less favorite people in all our countries and their rage against people they perceive come and take the little they have. So the first thing is not decolonization. The first thing is to make a more equitable society within our society. And in Europe, this is more feasible. When people have a decent house, a home, and have a job and feel security, are less likely to be opposed to sharing. And I think one possible thing we can do to decolonize is to show more how many people, migrants, have already in Europe been very good citizens. They are not, again, pointing out what do we have in common. When I worked as a community psychologist, I worked in Rome with migrant community, and in a particular neighborhood, the Chinese were dominant, and so everybody was talking of getting rid of the Chinese, not Italians, the Chinese. And when I tried to go more deep with this emotional stuff, because I always use a part political and a part emotional, in the emotional part, it came out that what they fear most, both the Italian, the Chinese, the Bangladesh people from South Africa, that their children would revolt against them. So what threatens a migrant most is to see that my children won't follow my religion, won't follow my values, they be against me. And this is also important because most religion migrants have dominant fathers, okay? And the battle, especially with their young women. Like we had episodes, as you all remember, of fathers killing the young girl because she wanted to marry an Italian or a Chinese or somebody else. So I think the ecofeminists are very important here to show that the work we have to do is not decolonize. It means always doing something for somebody else. It's looking inside us, all the violence roots we have inside, and how not to promote violence. Peace education in school, conflict resolution education. These things are important because we tend to choose to change others more than to change ourselves, and the two have to go together. We are facing extreme, if they're right, we are going to face extreme dangers because we're going to have all this climate change who makes us go worse. So to share, be willing to share, we have to have a real, and community psychology can give a contribution on this, to enlarge sense of community. So the in-groups become more and more big and the out-groups diminish. Instead, what happens now with the conflict mode, okay, if I say decolonize, immediately the ones who have a pride in a party, we have to be careful the use of words. See, if I say dialogue, or if I say, you are my enemy, the confrontation will go different ways. So I think what's important is for us to find more and more methods. We have them in community psychology. For instance, the profiling analysis made by Raffaello Martini. If we had more and more groups that talk together, talk to one another in the different community, we saw that doing these groups where they had movies to invent on the community, they were able to express emotion. After expressing the emotion, they were able to find common grounds. We have to point on common human grounds, common community ground on there. And that is one way to go. Okay. Otherwise, you have to ask a better expert because the other level I can't answer.
Thank you, Donata. I think Caterina Arcidiacono wanted to say something, so I'll let her speak.
Yes, I want to be very, very quick. I want to say thanks to Cinzia, to you, Francesca, and to Maria Jesu, because you met an idea, a fact. And for European community psychology and for community psychology, it is great that we have this webinar opportunity to overcome our distances and to renew our connection. And Donata is the founder of the European Community Psychology Network, and she signed the agreement of ECPA in Brussels with Jim Orford. And so I think that with this webinar is a tool to strengthen our connection and to be more effective in the European policies. So thanks to all of you, and obviously thanks to Donata, but you are the one who gave the floor and the stage to Donata. So thanks to you. Bye.
I thank you all for participating.
Thank you. Maybe if Maria can, before also Cinzia want to conclude, but maybe if Maria is able to unmute all of us, we can just,
clap the hands.
Clap the hands.
Yes.
To
yes.
Donata. I think she deserves.
Yeah.
Oh.
I wanted to thank Donata, to thank you all. I think that her lecture has been very stimulating. She brings into this conversation a lot of emotions. She talked about fears, about hope, about rage, about desire, and I think that she designed already some lines of thought for our social engaged agenda in terms of research and on an intervention. She also focused on two things that in a way represent well also Donata, I think. The idea to work in order to build a planetary sense of community, a planetary sense of responsibility, using collaborative approach. That is something that is typical, even if she's an activist, and I think that is a very interesting match, being an activist, but at the same time using collaborative strategies and tools in order to build a new awareness about these issues that are very relevant. But she's also a clear example of women's power and how women can bring a new perspective in dealing with this issue. And I think that this is something that is very powerful that we need to take into account, because it's also a new way of thinking about leadership, a collaborative leadership that probably is less represented in some of the people she mentioned before, some leaders that she mentioned before. So again, I want to thank you all. And Caterina was right. This was an idea that was developed last year, and we want to bring it concrete. So this is the first webinar in our series, because we wanted to start something new, and this is not the end, this is just the beginning. And we are planning another webinar that will be probably in July. We do not have fixed the date yet, but you will find the information on SCPA website and on the Facebook page of the association, because in July, Nora Betson will be with us, and she will be our guest in a webinar that has already a title that is How to Unstuck a System from Within, the Role of Systems Theory for a Sense of Community and Community Dynamics. And I think it's a nice way to go on with the discussion that we had today with some of the stimulus that we heard concluding this meeting. So again, now it's my turn to clap the end and to say goodbye, and thank you again for being with us.